friends, I would like to introduce you to my friend Kyle Pertuis. He is the owner of Mindfit Coaching and just an all-around incredible guy, coach, and mentor. I mean, he's blessed so many of us in the New Braunfels area and with his expertise, and I cannot wait for you to get to know him as well. So Kyle, I'll let you take it from here and just tell us a little bit about yourself. What have you done that's led you to this point in your life and your career, and what are you up to now?
First of all, thank you, Whitney, for having me on. First and foremost, I'm the husband of my bride, April, for 26 years and a proud father of two kids, about to be 20 and 17, respectively. So I think um, if someone asked me who I was and I could only answer that way, I would be good with that, right? Um, Beyond that, thanks for the introduction. I am the owner and founder and whatever else you want to call it, chief bottle washer of Mindfit Coaching. Started almost 16 years ago. Total will be 16 years. We'll probably talk a little bit about how that evolved. However, we primarily provide executive leadership and team performance coaching. And we align with L&D, HR departments to help launch cultural initiatives. So kind of a variety of things in the training and development space. Started off primarily working with entrepreneurs. And while I still do that a majority of our work is corporate facing now. That's how I spend my time with my team. Yeah, we hope that we are able to impact people in a way that allows them to think a little bit differently to make the kind of impact they want to have.
I chuckled when you were talking about all things, right? That's just the joy of entrepreneurship. You're janitor, CFO, chief marketing officer, and CEO, all the things. So as you talked about your mindset just then, walk me through. I know we've talked a little bit about strategic mindset. What does that look like? I know it's a big part of your model. So what does it look like to have a strategic mindset?
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a misconception with that, right? And it's interesting because I always draw the parallel now that football season's back in. You see the coaches a lot of times on the sidelines with these laminated pages, right, blue and pink, and they a lot of times have the entire game plan scripted out. And I don't think that's what strategic mindset is all about. It's not about having the whole thing scripted. I think it's about how you are seeing the field while everyone else is focused on having their head down and doing the job. And so I think it's important when we talk about strategic thinking and things like that, we talk about it in the construct of three areas. Acumen really is our ability to understand situations, to be able to zoom out and really take it in and generate new ideas and be able to pivot and adapt. The allocation piece is all about how are we deploying resources? How are we setting goals around the things that we want to accomplish? How are we making decisions and, aligning those things with our values? And of course, action kind of speaks for itself because strategy without action is just, a lot of times words on a wall. I think the combination of those things coming together and people understanding that it's not just about reacting to whatever is happening in front of us, but really being able to see past that. What am I going to call? What play am I going to call, to use that analogy again, 2, 3 plays down the line? And while we can't always predict the future, I think being able to, as I said, zoom out and really look at things from a broader perspective allows us to be prepared to adapt and pivot much more quickly. It's interesting, that question. I was on a call this morning with a team that I'm working with. Was challenging them in their team meetings to spend more intentional time really backing out and observing, right? Not just listening to what was going on or listening so that you can interject your opinion, your thoughts, but to really just back out and observe. Listen to what your people are saying, observe their behavior, their interaction with each other, all those kind of things. There's so much insight to be gained. And that's really, I think, one of those kind of micro habits from a strategic thinking standpoint or a strategic mindset that allows you to start to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, that is so true. I loved what you said about words without action are just words on a wall. I think that that is very clever and very true. But yeah, to your point, I do this a lot with facilitating with teams of when you spend too much time in a room with the same people, you begin to think similarly and you start missing the ideas outside of what you've grown accustomed to, right? Or maybe people don't feel like they can contribute their ideas. They know where their threshold is in that room. And so they don't bring the same depth to the table that they could offer the team, and the team suffers in that case. And so really taking the zoomed out approach, right? let's refocus and reorient and zoom out to reconsider what are the factors we're not presently considering. And
Right.
then over the course of the time together, let's begin to zoom back in till we have a really intentional, actionable plan. But I think what you're saying is so incredibly true of you've got to be able to think outside of just what's in front of you, take the blinders off to gain a different perspective, to be able to offer more to those around you and to lead the organization better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No question.
that's awesome. Well, as far as how this relates to kind of people you've worked with, organizations, especially entrepreneurs, how do you think a strategic mindset is something that we can integrate? Or what are some best practices, tools, and tips you would give to entrepreneurs as they are seeking to figure out how to have a strategic mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a laundry list of those things, right? And I think sometimes people are looking for the next book or the 10 bullets that somebody posts on LinkedIn to automatically shift those things. I think if I had to boil it down to a few that I think have really helped me, the first one I would say is really knowing when to pause before you take action, right? And I think strategy is so much about choosing the right direction or the right things to say yes to, and sometimes saying no to, right? So
Yeah.
I think distractions and things like that that are so easily upon us as entrepreneurs, if we don't start to elevate our awareness around pausing before we engage in things, then we kind of end up on that hamster wheel, right? And it feels like we're running and running and we're trying to multitask and do all of these things. And at the end of the day, I mean, we've all as entrepreneurs had these days, you're like, what did I even get done today? And you feel like you were busy, but you don't really see the productivity, right? And so being able to pause and be intentional. I mentioned the zoom in, zoom out. You shared it there. I think it's important to be able to observe your own patterns of behaviors, much less anybody else. And then you want to be able to jump in where you can have the biggest impact, right? Where can you make the biggest difference? And by zooming out, you start to see more of the field. I mean, one of the greatest examples I can think of, and I don't know how many soccer fans we have out there, but Leo Messi is unbelievable at this. And people give him such a hard time because he walks the entire game, you know? And for anybody that's played soccer, you see somebody walk and you're like, you know, they're kind of lazy. And this guy has such incredible strategic vision for everything that's going on. That's why he can react so quickly, right? Because he watches, he understands, he watches how people move off the ball, and he's able to react very, very intentionally and very quickly. If there's another one, I would say as entrepreneurs, a lot of times it's easy to get really caught up in the vision, right? In the what's next, or, you know, what is it that's down the road, or how can we get there? And sometimes it feels like we're lost in the clouds. And I think it's so important to be able to exercise that level of energy and that type of creativity, but we've got to ground it, right? We have to be able to pull it back down and then make it digestible for our people so that they can execute, right? Kind of going back to strategy being words on a wall. I mean, there are countless organizations with strategic plans that are this thick that don't really get executed. And that's not a luxury that small entrepreneurial businesses have, right? So really being able to translate that vision into action and then making sure that you're taking intentional and deliberate action as you look at things.
Absolutely. I do feel like in organizations too, maybe you've observed this as well. There tends to be like your high level visionaries and then the people who are really great at executing it, right? But there's a disconnect in the verbiage that they have together. And so the visionaries are communicating it, but the way it's being translated and interpreted by those who are able to execute it is not always the same language. And so a lot gets lost in translation. And so it's really crucial to find that bridge, whether that's a coach or consultant or somebody else within the organization to bridge that conversation. Do you feel like that's true in organizations that you work with as well?
Absolutely true. And I think, not to give a gratuitous plug to the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, but their distinction between the visionary and the integrator, which would define the role that you just were talking about from an executor standpoint, is probably one of the best I've seen. And it's understanding how do you establish those clear, really accountability roles so that people can execute, because you've got to have the visionary and you've got to have somebody that can execute it. So bringing that vision down and communicating to somebody that can go then throughout the organization, establish the things that need to be happening every year, you know, every quarter, so forth, and really executing at that level. So I don't think it matters how large the organization is. Maybe it becomes departmentalized when you have different types of people involved, but I think the visionary component and the integrator component must align so that execution can occur, right? Without action, we have nothing.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to action, which I know you have your Inspired Action podcast
Yeah.
series too. You're very action oriented. What advice would you give? Because I know going back to the visionary, right? I can be guilty of this as an entrepreneur of sometimes I spin out because the vision's so big. It's like, what do I take action on? So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs or leaders on how to translate the vision to action and then of course implementation to your team as well?
Well, I mean, I would roll this back up to the strategic thinking. And if owners and entrepreneurs are not scheduling intentional time to think strategically every week, start now. And I don't care if it's 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is you can allow for to digest those things, right? And a lot of times when I'm talking to people about doing this, whether they're in a large organization or it's a solopreneur, they're like, yeah, no, but if I block out an hour and I feel like I'm just sitting there and I'm just kind of thinking about all these things, I'm like, great. This is when you need to think. And if you will put it in practice, you will start to be able to have managed thinking, right? And that's where you allow yourself to tap into some of that creativity and some of those ideas and really recycle them and go back and see what you wrote down, but then take the additional time to say, okay, how does this translate? How does it align with the things that we're doing? How does it impact the team? How does it impact our resources? But really, I joke a lot. It's like, I'm going to change the whole definition of AI to awareness and intention,
Hmm.
because it's entrepreneurs and anyone in the working world, anyone in human life. If we elevate our awareness around things, around how we're showing up, how we're engaging, how we're interacting with people, we can become much more intentional in how we respond, right? And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about the pause. And so partially talking about scheduling time to think strategically is really creating that pause for you to have it very intentionally. So then you can come out, engage in the conversations that you need to have, get collaborative input on things that you're not sure about, instead of just this top down direct. I mean, how many times have you gone into organizations and see people's like, we've got so many conflicting goals and we get a new initiative every week, right? And people are just kind of like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water because you never know what's coming next. And a lot of time that's because people are spinning out of control and they're trying to come up with the next best thing, and it's not communicated well. And so I think that pause creates so much space for us to be better thinkers and much more intentional.
That's great. I love the pause and the intentionality, because that's missing in a lot of organizations, and that's a strategic approach. I mean, as far as organizations you've worked with, what do you think some of the breakdowns in communication tend to be?
It's funny. People ask me, it's like, well, what's the biggest challenge you face when you're working in large organization? Like, it's communication, always will be, right? As long as humans are involved, that's going to always be the biggest challenge. And so I think it's asking for clarity, right? I think a lot of times we see things happen when we make assumptions that people get it or completely understood. And if we know anything about visionaries, what's up here does not always translate here as clearly as it possibly can. And so to that, I would say ask questions, be curious, establish expectations on both sides, right? And if we'll take the time to pause and say, huh, I wonder what Whitney meant when she told me this is how she wanted me to go about executing on this. I better ask. And then you go ask. And we will talk about limiting beliefs, but there are so many things that prevent, especially senior leaders, from doing those things. I don't want them to think I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't want them to think that, they're telling me things that I should understand and I don't know. And so a lot of that starts to play the mind games within ourselves. So I think that would be a really, really big one, is seek clarity, stay curious, ask questions.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that feeds into expectations, like you were saying.
Oh yeah.
If you have misaligned expectations, people become a lot more frustrated and disgruntled more quickly. And then work tends to slip. The quality of work is not as high production as it could be. And yeah, so it all comes back to what is my expectation of you, of the job? Is there clarity surrounding that? And then how do I communicate that so that we're on the same page and check in, right? Like, don't just leave them like, okay, I'm communicating this expectation one time. Hopefully it connected and now you're on your own. Good luck. And if you mess up, we're going to have a conversation about your performance, right?
Yeah. Well, and then we get into the conversation around accountability. And what I tell people all the time is expectations should be two-way. right? So it's not Kyle coming to Whitney and saying, now, Whitney, here's what I expect you guys to have done in the next week. I would expect my people to come back and have Whitney say, okay, so what can I expect from you? These are resources that I need. Are we going to be able to make some adjustments there? And I want to hear you thinking about that. I'm saying, yes, let's do it. What do you need to succeed? Right. Instead of it's just always one way. And then there's so many organizations where that's the case. And they're the ones that are struggling. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I had somebody we went to dinner recently and she was just clearing the air between us and she was like, "I began to realize that I was not assuming the best about you. And so therefore there was something unaddressed on my end that I need to bring into the air so that I can continue to think the best of you." And I was like, wow, that was really mature to
Yeah.
recognize you're assuming the worst about me in this moment. And how kind of you to give me the space to say, that's not at all what my intention was. Let me realign expectations around this. But to your point of if it's all one sided, then I think the receiver can often tend to feel like I can't assume the best about them. This is standard for what I should expect from this. Right. And
Yes.
so then we become disgruntled, there's resentments, and then that will wreck a culture of a company so quickly.
But that's a perfect example, Whitney, of how good conflict can exist, right? Their willingness to make that statement to you, they took ownership in their perspective. They let you hear it. And so now you can move forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember one of my very best friends, he and a friend of his had started a business. This was years ago. And we were out somewhere and something came up. And I can remember them having a conversation clear as day. He just said, Joe, man, I'm really disappointed in you because of X, Y, and Z. Joe said, man, thanks for that. I was really disappointed about this too. How do we move forward? And it was just like a 3-minute exchange. And I was watching them. I was like, that is how partners should function, right?
Yep.
Have an expectation that there are going to be fires, but you're going to come together to put them out or make them bigger if you need to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that goes into any partnership, marriage,
absolutely.
company partner, boss,
Anywhere.
superior employee, all the different dynamics. I love
That's right.
that. That's great. Well, what other mindset tricks or clarity hacks or anything like that from your experience working with entrepreneurs of varying sizes? I know you've had your own journey from starting with smaller companies now to, like you said, working with the larger corporations. What are some things that you would maybe share with entrepreneurs who are still on that journey of figuring out how does this work and how do I make clarity in conversations and handle conflict or any of the things we've talked about? How do I make that more clear?
Think, I think a lot of times entrepreneurs take off so fast that it really becomes all about what do I have to do next, right? And you think about stages of business and you think about being in survival mode or when you're starting up and everything is, we got to watch this and we got to do that. And if we don't do this and we're kind of really just locked in, which you've got to be. But I see a lot of times they don't take the time to step back and recalibrate and realize that the business is here and they are not the business. Even if they're the only one that can contribute, everything is dependent on them. A lot of these solopreneur businesses, and you think about coaching and things like that. But stepping back and saying the business is its own entity, and I'm still a human being, right? And so really, really taking ownership of that and then connecting that back to the drivers that you have, right? What are your reasons? Why are you subjecting yourself to the grind if you are, right? Where am I in this stage of business, right? So what is it that I'm doing now that's going to allow me to get to that next level? And so I think always anchoring into those core drivers of why is this important? What is it that gets me excited about getting up, every single morning and putting this hat on and saying, yeah, I am ready for the day and I'm going to go make some things happen. So I think that's really important. Know your reason and your season, right? The second thing I would say, and I've done a lot of work around core energy, but so often one of the big challenges entrepreneurs and really people in business say are, well, I just don't have time. Right. And so there's, again, countless systems for managing time. I would argue that managing energy is much more important than time, right? And I think that becomes really, really important. I think it speaks to mindset. It speaks to how you recover, how you recharge, knowing when you perform at your optimal levels, all of those kind of things. I think surrounding yourself with the right people, right? Having conversations with people that have nothing to do with your industry, having conversations with people who've had success in other areas of life. And I think obviously we're biased to having a coach and having someone in your corner that can help do those things. But you also need to be surrounding yourself with people that will challenge you, right? And a lot of times we want to run ideas past our friends and families, either to have them shot down or to validate that they think our good idea is a good idea, even if it's not. And
Yeah.
so that's not always the best input in those situations. So I would say make sure you surround yourself with the right people. And then I think finally, I would say understanding that business is a slow series of consistent steps repeated. My wife's coach told her years ago, making money is boring and making a lot of money is really boring. And it's because we have to execute in the simplest way possible. And we've got to do it repeatedly. And then we've got to evaluate. And then we've got to repeat it again. And we've got to evaluate. And we've got to repeat it again. And I think a lot of times we just want to take off and go and launch. And we have to remember it's establishing those steps, establishing those systems, and letting those steps execute towards the idea and doing it consistently. And even when it feels hard, we've got to keep going. I don't
Man,
know how
those are
many that was, but that was a few.
I think 3, but that was great. I mean, all 3 of those made perfect sense. Just a couple of examples of how that's played out in my life recently. I ended up calling somebody. I got offered a board position with an area nonprofit. And then I got a call a couple of days later that was like, hey, actually, we want you to be president of said
Oh, yeah.
organization. And I was like, oh, wow, well, that's really flattering. But the more context I got, the more I realized this was going to be a really big undertaking. And they're trying to make some really significant changes. And I was trying to figure out, can I do that and simultaneously continue to get my business off the ground, right? Like I'm still new and repivoting since the beginning of the year and trying to figure out, like, can I split my energy in both of those directions? And somebody asked me a really great question. They said, Whitney, will this bring you joy? And I was like, I don't know if I could say it brings me joy. I think it's a challenge. It seems exciting. And they were like, that's not the same thing as joy. And so I think to your point, like, where is your energy best spent? What's really going to help you achieve what you feel your God-given purpose is? And then also having the people in your corner who are willing to challenge you and be like, okay, but that doesn't sound like joy. That sounds
Yeah.
like maybe a little bit of excitement, maybe a little bit of obligation. Let's reorient around this and consider what's really the best use of your energy. So I love all of that you were just saying. I think it's so
So
true.
did you make a decision on that?
I did.
Okay. You don't have to tell me your,
No, I decided that it was not the right time, that I would be honored to do it in another season of life. For right now, it felt like I was probably going to be pulled in 2 opposite directions and neither one would get the best of my energy.
yeah. And another great example of taking time to pause, think about it, and making a very intentional no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See, you're coaching right here on this call. It comes so naturally for us.
No, I was just repeating your example.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so when it comes to one of the questions that I love to ask is, what is a fear or obstacle or limiting belief that you've come up against, and how have you found to work through that or even overcome it? What advice would you give there?
So many. I think we get into the discussion about limiting beliefs, going all the way back to that gremlin message, right? It's kind of that resounding voice in your mind that's telling you some version of you're not good enough or whatever. I think for me, kind of on my journey of hopefully elevating my awareness some, I think imposter syndrome has probably been one early on, especially in my career. Maybe even starting as entrepreneurs, we're doing things and putting our names and our brands out there and hoping to make an impact. But I think another one that I don't know 25 years ago would have ever crossed my mind, but it's something that I think has come up in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. But the fear of success, you hear people talk about the fear of failure all the time, but the fear of success, and I'll give you some personal insight on this. I had been a partner in a very successful hospitality business from the early 2000s until about 2009. And we grew very quickly, had no intention of going in and manage a restaurant. I told them, I want to be a partner. I want to grow multiple locations and I want to accelerate this thing. And we did. The problem is the really great business did not align with the really toxic partnership that I had. Right. And so coming out of that, in doing the self-discovery that I did, that's kind of led me down the path that I'm on now. I have some shell shock around that, right? Because I went in, I did the things I said I was going to do. We grew really quick. And then something happens, right? And as I started thinking about where did that come from? It goes way back to when I was young, and I could nail down specific times in my life where I was doing things and it was great and I was all in and I wasn't bothered. I was the visionary and the executor and kind of experiencing, creating, and observing all at the same time. Sudden, the other shoe drops, right? Something happens. So you get in your head about those things and you don't recognize the patterns of behavior, the patterns of thinking, and you're like, oh, here it goes again. Why am I settling for just coasting? Why am I settling for just getting up? Because it's like, well, this is all going to end too. So what's the point in putting a whole lot of effort into it? Doing pretty good right now. We start rationalizing. We tolerate things that normally as high performers we wouldn't. And so I think that has been one that I continue to work with. I think that and imposter syndrome. I think, if you are not challenging yourself to the level of where you at least say, am I going to do all right at this? Then I think you need to challenge yourself a little further. Right. And so whether that's stepping on bigger stages, whether that's coming up with some type of new revenue stream in the business, whether it's engaging in some type of collaborative partnership, something new, I think we have to push ourselves and test ourselves there and then understand that we can manage those limiting beliefs by identifying, looking at them, asking how true they are, being willing to explore where they came from.
Yeah, I love that. Finding the root of it, right? Like we do that in organizations, but it's so much harder to do in our own head sometimes. I had somebody actually ask me that when I was starting my business. We were at a coffee shop and people in my life are really good at like nailing down the right thing to say in like 5 minutes of conversation with me. I don't know what that says about me, but he was like, are you afraid of success or failure? And I was like, well, failure. And he's like, really? Or is it success? And I was really tripped up by that question. I was like, why would I fear success? But then,
Mhm.
and I've shared this on another podcast episode, it's because in my head, I'm such a perfectionist that the next level it goes back to that imposter syndrome. Like it's like every time you level up, there's the imposter syndrome and there's oh, what if I don't live into the next level of this? Right. And
Yeah.
so you want to level up, but it comes with the fear of, but everybody expects this of me. Now
Yeah.
I have to perform at this level. And I'm scared I'm going to let everybody down if I don't reach this level. And so it becomes the fear of success. At least that's the way it works for me.
Yeah. Well, and they say new level, new devil, right? And
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about that, and I know how hard I worked when I was in my partnership, I mean, just nonstop. And so for me, as I would reflect on that and say, I'm never going to work like that again, ever, ever, never. And whatever came of it, came of it. But then when I realized that my drivers and the things that I thought were important to me at that time are not the same, and now work can feel effortless. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it can feel effortless, right? Because we're not taking all the dead weight with us and all the baggage and all the negativity and all those kind of things that so often you hear people say, well, you just got to have grit. You just got to suck it up and fight your way through it. I'm like, yeah, that actually just creates more conflict than necessary, right?
I think that comes from going back to the clarity and strategic mindset, right? Like, do I know how I'm wired, how I'm gifted? Do I have my identity anchored in the right place to where I know the fullness of who I am is not based on human merit or opinion,
Yeah.
but then that frees me up to show up and bring who I am to the table and serve with all that I've been created to do in a way that's a lot more natural than just forcing it for the sake of performance or climbing the ladder or whatever that case may be, right?
Yeah. And giving yourself grace to be human.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not as good at that one yet. Maybe that
Yeah.
comes with time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your insights. Do you have anything else that we didn't cover or other thoughts that you would want to share?
Well, I mean, I could go on and on and on. I think we covered a lot of ground. One thing that I would say that I think continues to maybe not always be verbalized when people ask some of the questions you do is, for me, what has helped me more than anything, an entrepreneur and having the success that I've had, is being anchored in my faith. And I think I don't always offer that up. And I think it's important because whatever that means to people, you've got to have something bigger than who you are in order to go after it. And I think it's been
Yeah,
evident in the way we've responded to things. It's been evident when we've achieved things. And going back to me saying who I was, my wife and kids. And I think that's the proof that I need.
that's all it comes back to, right? Is I love Solomon's words in Ecclesiastes of everything is meaningless. And I think in climbing the corporate ladder and getting to, like, I had the goal to be a VP by 30, it was like I got there and then I don't know what I was expecting, some type of
Yeah.
like big recognition or
A
whatever,
parade.
and it was like, no, it just comes with more responsibility and more pressure. Like everything's meaningless, like not in a
Mhm.
depressive way. It's just like, oh, what did I think I was living for? But then when you come back to that rooted place of like, this is what I'm living for, whether that be faith or whatever the case may be for somebody. I mean, for me, similarly, then, it's like, oh, I'm living for what God has gifted me to do. And out of
Yeah.
that abundance, I get to live a much more fulfilled life.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want your help, especially with leadership and development, and we didn't talk about it, I think you also help people with succession planning, right? Am I
We do
wrong on
some,
that?
not as much as we used to, right?
Okay.
Initially, we were working in family-owned businesses, transitioning from generation to generation. So some of that succession planning, not doing that quite as much, but I have a lot of really good collaborative partners that do that I would be happy to refer people to. Yeah, you can find us. LinkedIn is probably the easiest, right? Just go to my personal page, Kyle Pertuis, www.mindfitcoaching.com. If you want to check out the website that seems to constantly be under construction and is again. And, you mentioned our Inspired Action series. I'd love to share a little bit about that. It's
Yeah.
been really, really fun. And by design, the name is really what it's all about. We want to inspire people to go out to learn from our guests and take action that's making an impact on others. And so Inspired Action has its own page on LinkedIn as well. You can contact me directly. We'd love to have people on as guests too. So if people are interested in doing that and getting their message around leadership out in the world, we'd love to explore that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've gotten to be a guest on Inspired Action.
Yeah.
It was so cool. It's 10 minutes
Yeah.
and three different people get to share. Kyle's got a great question for them. So you guys be sure to check that out because it's both fun to be a part of it and to get to just hear so many incredible insights in such a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on today and can't wait to share your insights and let people connect with you. And so just really appreciate who you are and just how you continually give back to our community and to me and others as well. So thanks so
Yeah.
much, Kyle.
My pleasure, Whitney. Thanks again for having me.